Hey there, welcome to DIY Comics FAQ. I'm GE Gallas and I'm here to answer all your questions about indie comics, graphic novels, webcomics, zines, self-publishing, storytelling, you name it. If you like my videos, don't forget to subscribe. Today I'm answering a question from Devonte Harris at Devonte Artist on Twitter. They ask, should you try to get beta readers for your comics? That's an interesting question. Let's start by talking about what a beta reader is. So a beta reader is a test reader who gives feedback from the point of view of an average reader. So a beta reader and an editor are somewhat similar, but I think an editor is more concerned about the quality of your content, of your writing, rather than a beta reader who's perhaps looking at the entertainment value more, or looking at how the author is communicating to the reader or to their audience. My short answer is yes, you should get a beta reader or an editor or a friend, any second pair of eyes that aren't your own on your work, on your script. You really need a second or even third pair of eyes on your own work because it's difficult as the author, the artist, to separate yourself, to take a step back from your work and look at it critically. So I definitely recommend having someone look at your work and give you constructive criticism, give you feedback that you can improve your work. If you're just starting out and you don't make any money off of your writing or your art or your comics, I would suggest not spending money on a beta reader or an editor. Try to find someone who will do it for free, like a friend. I'm someone who believes in paying artists, paying writers, paying editors. I think they all deserve to be paid for their time and hard work. But if you're not making any money, I think you really need to try to find someone who can do it for free. I think one of the most important things about finding a beta reader or an editor or a friend or whoever to take a look at your work is you have to find someone that you trust, that you respect their opinion, perhaps that you have similar tastes in movies and books and TV and whatever as them, so that you feel like their feedback is valuable. So if you're asking someone to edit and give you feedback about your comic book and you choose someone who's never read a comic book in their life, that could be a problem because they might not understand the language of a comic book and then give you feedback that doesn't necessarily apply to people who understand comic books. That having been said, I often ask my parents for advice and feedback on my comic book and graphic novel scripts, and neither one is particularly familiar with comics. My parents are obviously familiar with comic strips in the newspaper, but I don't think they've ever sat down and read a graphic novel before. But because I know that my parents have similar tastes in media as I do, we have similar tastes in movies and television shows and novels, then I can really trust their opinion. And I can trust that they're going to give me feedback that's valuable to making my comic or graphic novel better. As I briefly touched on before, when we edit and review our own work, it's difficult to take a step back. It's easy to miss things, miss typos or mistakes, or it might be difficult to find things that might be confusing to the reader because we're so involved in our own work. So we might just miss things that a second or third pair of eyes would immediately recognize. So that's why I really encourage getting that second or third or even fourth or fifth pair of eyes on your work, because there are a lot of things you could have missed and you obviously want your comic to be the best that it can be. Even though my parents are not very familiar with comic books and graphic novels. One of the reasons that I trust their opinion is that they're both very creative in their own way. My mom is an abstract painter who reads novels constantly. She's constantly reading, and we do read a number of the same books and discuss these books with each other, these novels. Like, we both love the Victorian author Wilkie Collins, and we love discussing his work with each other. So we both have a similar taste level, and I can trust the feedback that she's gonna give me on my comic book scripts. In a similar way, my dad is a lawyer, so I know he's very detail oriented. Because he's so detail oriented, he often catches the typos and mistakes that I don't, so that's really valuable. And in his spare time, he likes to write fiction novels, so he has his own creativity even though that's not his primary job. Plus, my parents are familiar with me and my work that I've produced over the years because I always ask them for their advice on whatever I'm doing. They're obviously familiar with me as a person and familiar with me as an artist, so they know how to give good constructive criticism, and they understand parts of my work that might be confusing to people who don't know me. So you don't necessarily need a beta reader or editor familiar with the medium you're working in. So you don't necessarily need someone familiar with comics or graphic novels, but at least someone who can understand it to a certain level and who can give you constructive criticism. Definitely try to find someone who fits into the genre that you're working in. So if you're doing, for instance, a horror graphic novel, a horror genre comic, even if your second pair of eyes doesn't know too much about comics, but they know a lot about horror through movies and books and whatnot, that might be a really good fit even if they're not an expert in comics. You don't want someone to just sugarcoat it and say, this is really good, I don't have any feedback, you don't have to change anything. You want someone who can pinpoint a problem area so that you can go back over your own work and figure out the best way to fix that problem on your own. I could probably make an entire episode on how to find a beta reader or an editor online, so let me know if that's something that interests you for a future episode. Let me know in the comments below. But I'm sure all of you have plenty of friends out there who would be lining up to take a look at your work, so definitely don't hesitate to ask your friends for their help. Also, I would highly suggest having a beta reader or editor look at your work in the script stage before you start drawing final pages. That's because if your editor has adjustments to make or you need to change things based on your beta reader or editor's feedback, you haven't taken hours and hours to draw it all out. That can be really frustrating if you have drawn all the pages and then you figure out you need to change things. So it's better to change things in the script stage, in the planning stage, than after you've already drawn everything, because it takes so many hours and so much hard work to draw final comic book pages. So I hope this episode was helpful to Devante and all of you out there watching. It's a pretty interesting topic. I think the relationship between writer-artist and beta reader-editor is a really interesting one, and it takes a lot of trust on the artist-writer's part to allow their work to be criticized, even if it is constructive criticism. So it's really the best thing if you can find an editor that you can really trust their opinion and their feedback. Art can be so personal and it can be hard to relinquish your script to a reader at first. So definitely find someone you can trust. I think that's the most important thing about finding a beta reader or an editor or a second pair of eyes. Do you have a question for me about making comics? If you'd like me to answer your question in a future episode, please send me your questions. You can reply below on this episode, or you can tweet me at GEGallas, that's GEGALLAS. I look forward to receiving your questions, and I can't wait to answer them in a future episode. Want to support this channel? Please subscribe below. It's one easy click. It's free. You'll get notified every time I post a new episode, which is Tuesdays and Thursdays. That's all for now. See you next time.